I have a question that kind of plays on what Chris
Yeah, we
asked.
can now open to all questions to any of the panelists, so go ahead.
Oh, okay, well, this is also for the Post-Dispatch.
Yeah.
But I was just curious about, so the pushback after Ferguson coverage and then the coverage of Boston after Freddie Gray, was that the media put so much emphasis on kind of the violent or like looting things that people were doing without putting as much focus on the peaceful aspects of the demonstrations. And I was wondering if on the ground that was something that you observed and kind of how you tried to fight against that, if you did.
I think if you watched that video there, we had some ordinary scenes in there of, the girls jumping rope, and there were other pictures Robert talked about of the people going and getting their groceries there. There were, I think a lot of our front pages did have a lot of the looting and tear gas and other things taking place on it, because those were the things that were happening last, and those were the most up-to-date and current things. They were radically different protests in the day and the night, but then on the inside pages we would balance out that with some, entire picture pages that may feature things from the more calm, more peaceful protests from earlier in the day. But when a Quick Trip gets burned, or when police officers are firing tear gas on the streets of an American city, that's a pretty significant event that's got a lot of news value that we can't ignore. But we did try to be sensitive to that and show all aspects of the protest there.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I had a question for Doug. Doug, you worked at really big newspapers like USA Today, and then you worked at sort of local papers, small to medium sized. What sort of lessons working at a smaller paper where the reporting is much more intimate, it's less about calling out some official, it's more about, say, knocking on doors to, talk to someone whose son has been killed, or someone whose son killed somebody, et cetera. I mean, what are those lessons, and how has that fueled your sort of investigative reporting?
That's a really good question. When I was at USA Today, we didn't care if the neighborhood hospital was killing people. All hospitals had to be killing people. So we had to have that wider, bigger perspective. At the Post and Courier, we are so intimately involved in our community, just as you all were, that it provides a different perspective. When the Emanuel AME shootings occurred, one of the women who was a caregiver for my mom was an AME minister and sat with the wife of the Reverend that night after he was killed, and described for me what he said, which is the way Jennifer and I were able to, by knowing people, put an account together 2 days after the shootings of exactly what happened inside the church that night. So the intimacy you have with your own community in a small area is amazing, and what it can do to increase the level of your journalism.
Yes, please.
Hi, so my question is, I guess, for all of you. All of your stories, to a certain extent, incorporate different forms of media. We're in this multimedia world. And so I was wondering, how do you really decide, okay, I'm going to take a video of this instead of taking a picture, or, these women are telling us their stories, I'm going to write this, or later I'm going to film this. What is your kind of decision-making process in terms of which media best illustrates your story?
Those are two different kind of things. When we were talking to the victims, we basically had built a relationship with them, and they were telling us their stories, and we asked them if they'd be willing to tell their story on video. Whereas these guys were actually in an active news event that was happening in public. So it's in public, therefore you have the right to take a picture of anybody doing anything if you feel like it. You don't have an obligation to ask permission.
I think the question was, how do you decide, whether to take a video or a photograph or write a story?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what I do is I will pick, okay, I'm going to shoot photos right now, and I have to be okay in my mind with leaving some great video on the floor, just not getting it. And then there's other times where I'm like, okay, this is going to be video, and when I choose the video, I have to be okay with leaving great photos out there that I didn't get. And I try to commit to I make up my mind that what I'm going to do, that this is going to be the best route. And As far as how I'm going to handle that, that's a gut feeling. I think that this is going to be better video. This person's, if someone's just talking to me and they're telling me something real interesting, that may not be a compelling still, but that might be compelling video. So I may choose video then. But I have to be willing, you have to sell out and be willing to leave one or the other on the floor, because if you try to do both equally at the same time, neither one's going to be very good.
And you have to make that decision like in a split second.
Right.
Yeah. Dan, did you want to say to add something?
Well, and the push-pull with the photographer and the reporter deciding what to do. I know with ours, we decided early on that we weren't going to shoot video for that part. And then we shot video later on when we went on with stories. And it is that kind of gut feeling. It was like these are quiet stories, and video can be a little more intrusive. It can really add something. If it, like the video for you guys was just so moving, because you needed to see their faces and you just needed to see their expressions. So as soon as he decides that he wants to shoot stills, because in my case, we had this kind of precedence of what had come before. We couldn't ignore that there was this Dust Bowl and that people thought of black and white photographs. So Michael made that decision. But as soon as he makes that decision, then it's up to me to do the storytelling, because make you connect to the people because you don't have the video. But it's so interesting, the conversations each and every time. And I think you're so right. The one thing I know for sure is you can't do both. If you try to do both, you don't do, well, at least in my experience. I mean, do you not agree? It's like when you're in the field and things are happening fast, to have somebody shooting video and worrying about sound, and as the reporter, you can't ask questions, you have to be quiet, and I can't work. So it really is a case by case, and it's an important choice.
Yeah, we had a situation recently where there were some survivors from the AME shooting who were finally getting up the courage to tell their story. And some initial conversations, they reached out to Jen and they wanted to talk to her, and some initial conversations where she was going to go, and then it was like, maybe we need a second reporter, and then maybe we should have a couple photographers, then we'll have the videographer come, and suddenly it's like this entire crew, Jen was like, no, and it's like the entire crew descending on the scene, and that changes the whole dynamic of the interview, and it's probably putting people ill at ease. And
now it just keeps growing, right? Because now it's not just video, do you shoot video or photography? Are we going to do 360? Or are you going to?
Diane talked about putting the notebook up in front of her, and the camera does act as a barrier during interviews.
Yeah.
There are times when you need to back off and let the reporter establish and build that relationship and build that trust, and then the reporter can introduce you in, or in times. And other times, you're finding the subject for the report, and you're like, come over here, sit. Talk to her.
You have to be really good at the eye contact.
So it's a give and a take.
But also, I mean, we don't have all the answers to this either. I mean, this is evolving, at least in our newsroom. There's, it seems like every month or so there's a new doohickey that we want to do, and we're trying to survive as media companies, and so we're trying to tell stories the best way that our readers will get them, and so we definitely don't have all the answers either. It's learning. We're still learning.
Good enough. Thank you.
It was very good. I think that's probably the best answer you could get to that question. Yes, please.
I just want to say congratulations to you all, and thank you for being here. My question was for the Till Death Do Us Part team. It's kind of a two-part question. I wanted to know, can you anticipate how your articles will impact legislation or the communities that you found the victims and their families? And I'm wondering how the story impacted you personally. Like, did you feel like you've become more of an advocate against domestic violence, or just curious?
So I think it's very difficult to predict how your story is gonna go in the community when you launch it. We've run some series that we thought were really groundbreaking and really important, and told some stories, and they kind of landed with a thud and crickets, and you really had to sort of follow up afterwards and look for things. This one, out of the gate, we were worried, or not worried, we weren't sure exactly what the reaction was going to be, because we said some kind of strong things about the legislature, and the paternalistic society in South Carolina and religion, a whole bunch of hot-button topics, talked about different areas of the state in maybe not the most flattering ways. We weren't sure if we were going to get a lot of blowback, and we didn't at all. People just immediately embraced it from the politicians on, and it just started this big dialogue. As for how it impacts you, certainly it changes your mind on things. I was telling these guys earlier today, I was given a talk at a domestic violence forum that they had that sprung out of the series, and a woman came down afterwards, and she, probably in her, I won't say, she's a middle-aged woman, and she came down and said, I just want to thank you for running this series. It meant everything to me, because my daughter was strangled a year ago by her boyfriend, took a computer cord, moment of rage, killed her. And they live in a very small town of Clinton, South Carolina, very rural area, and the guy was a very popular guy, and so there was a lot of backlash when he got arrested for the murder. And when he was convicted, his friends went, or supporters of his went, and defaced the gravestone of her daughter. So this poor woman is just ravaged on all levels, and she felt so alone and so outcast, and she read the series and read about some folks like Kristen Rainey, who lost his whole family, and some of these other folks, and got up the courage to reach out to them, and they said, well, come on down to Charleston. And now she's part of that group, and they're going to advocate for things. And it's this honor, the Pulitzer, is the most honoring and humbling thing that's ever happened in my career. And but that moment to me was like, wow, that's why I got into the business.
And to echo that, I think when we were working on this story, there are certain stories you go into and you feel like you have maybe some personal background that makes you able to relate to the people. And I went into this, I don't have any sort of domestic violence in my family, and I was really interested in the idea of why women stay in these relationships, because I think that's really a foundational question that we have to ask ourselves. Especially if we tend to think, why don't they get out of the relationships? It's on some level their fault, right? And so I think the thing that I walked away from the most was a better understanding of why that is. And it was interesting, it actually has something to do with the title of this series, Till Death Do Us Part, came from an interview Doug and I went on with a woman who runs a domestic violence shelter in Charleston. And at some point we asked her this question, and she said, well, there's love, and there's that religion thing. She said, and till death do us part, referring to the marital vows. And she talked about how women stay in relationships like this because they really love this person. They fell in love with their husband, they fell in love with their boyfriend, and in their minds, that person will return. If he stops drinking, if he stops doing drugs, if I stop pissing him off, if I start, if, then things will be better. Things will go back to the way they were before, the way I envision them. And that really, for me, that really was a watershed moment to understand that these women were trying to hold on to marriages. They were trying to hold on to people they loved and believed could get better. And I have to say, so for me to walk away, I really felt like I walked away from this with a whole different understanding of what domestic violence is about that I didn't have before. And then, of course, you hope that you convey that to your readers. But that was one piece that in my mind still today really sticks with me.
Thank you. Yes, our last question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Congratulations. I have two questions. One is for sorry, I do not know I forget the
Marcum?
newspaper.
Yeah.
No.
Diana?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, yes.
And the team. What did you learn about the perpetrators, and do you think that's a story angle worth pursuing, or going too far down the devil's advocate? Because at least I am curious. Criminals tend to be outliers, but domestic violence, really, there's just so many people that do it that it seems, I always wonder why, yeah. And then my second question is for the team from the Dispatch, right? These pictures they're about conflict, but they're very rich and intimate. And you've covered conflicts outside of the United States. This is definitely a way richer. You get a sense of community, different players, different situations. Did covering conflict at home, give you any insights on how you could bring that, just that much intimacy to reporting conflict elsewhere?
Some quick answers. Yes, Jennifer? Yeah.
We shared the same question about the perpetrators, is what makes somebody do something like that? And I think we came away with an idea that there are almost two camps of people. There are abusers who kind of fall into an anger management problem, which I think is a minority. But domestic violence, we realized, was really a power issue. This is about controlling another human being. It's about having complete power over someone. So Doug and I, and actually Doug wound up going to a batterer treatment program to try to understand, are those programs effective? What is the mindset of a batterer? That was really, really hard for us to get at because, as you can imagine, not a lot of batterers wanted to share that with us. But we wound up going to this, you should talk about that, but to answer your question, we found that really this is a very, for instance, somebody who beats their wife at home usually does not go to the office and have that kind of relationship with the people they work with. So obviously he's able to control his anger and his behavior. He's consciously controlling this, usually a wife or a girlfriend, in this way. So that was one thing we really wanted to convey. A lot of people tried to blow it off as, oh, he got mad, he lost his temper, she did whatever. And we really did try to get beyond that to understand that this was an issue of control. But Doug was able to get into a batterer treatment program.
Yeah, Jennifer's correct. The central issue is control. And many abusers give all sorts of indications that they will be abusers early on. When they start wanting to know where the woman's going, who's going to be there, or they say they want to accompany them. They want to start controlling the person's activities to the point at which many of these women end up getting trapped in their own houses. They cut them off from their families, they cut them off from friends, and they end up dominating and controlling their entire lives. And their main weapon actually is the threat of violence and the use of violence. And what we ran into is there's this cyclical cycle, as you would call it, of after the abuse occurs, the husband or the man is always very sad that he did it. He always begs for forgiveness. He starts bringing her flowers again. She sees the romance back, and unfortunately, the cycle just keeps going. And and that's why I think in part it's so difficult to get out of, because it's a crime that occurs almost invisibly, because it happens in the privacy of a home most often. And that's what makes it so invisible for our society to deal with, because people want to say, oh, that's just a marital issue. In fact, that was one of the huge issues that we ran into when people would go to their ministers and want to be counseled because they're having domestic abuse problems. A lot of the ministers we ran into didn't see domestic violence as a crime. They saw it as a marital issue. And the sheriff of Oconee County actually told us that what was happening is these ministers were sending women back into a burning home.
Quick answer, David.
You asked me if it would change the way I do future conflict reporting, I think, and I think it's difficult when I've traveled out of the country to cover wars. I don't fully know the communities. I was able to be successful in Ferguson because I knew the community there. When we do travel, to cover wars for the Post-Dispatch, we're trying to find some local angle on it, and so to bring it home to the readers there. But I think it's hard to translate my experiences in Ferguson into providing better conflict coverage.
Thank you.
That ends our panel for the evening. I just wanted to say that each year when we do this, we see the things that go into the great journalism that occurs in this country. And we saw it tonight for sure, the ingenuity and the courage that it takes to do this kind of work. And I think what we really saw was how much great journalism depends on people's skills. Every journalist who spoke this evening was in touch with people in a way that really helped them get the story. So I really want to thank our panelists for a wonderful presentation, and Sheila also. And I want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you.